Truth is like mercury. It is fluid, hard to hold on to, but reflects everything with chilling clarity. Experience the changing nature of reality in our latest high-tech cinematic thrillers. Subscribe now and follow the flow of the truth as it reveals itself to the world today.
Sign the disclaimer, or you'll get nothing. My brother hissed those words inches from my face while I stood at our grandmother's open grave, still holding a single white lily I hadn't yet placed on her casket. Around us, 43 members of our extended family watched in silence. Some pretended to study their shoes. A few leaned in. No one said a word. I looked down at the document he was pressing into my hands, a formal renunciation of inheritance, pre-signed by a notary with my name already typed at the bottom line. All I had to do was add my signature and disappear. I had driven 11 hours to bury the woman who raised me for 3 summers, the woman who taught me to read contracts before I could drive, the woman who told me at 17 that I was going to be someone. And my brother had chosen the 10 minutes between the pastor's closing prayer and the first shovelful of dirt to hand me legal paperwork. I didn't cry. I didn't sign. I folded the document once, tucked it into my coat pocket, and dropped the lily into the grave myself. Then I turned and walked to my rental car without looking back. Before I tell you exactly what I found in the next 48 hours and why my brother and my father are no longer free men, I want to ask you something. Drop it in the comments. What is the one moment you realized your family saw you as an obstacle, not a person? I read every single one. My name is Claire. I am 32 years old. I am a corporate attorney specializing in estate and trust litigation, which means I spend my professional life doing exactly one thing: finding the document that someone hoped you would never read. The irony is not lost on me. I drove back to the motel where I was staying, 40 minutes outside my hometown, because going back to my parents' house had stopped being an option 3 years ago, and I sat on the edge of the bed with my coat still on. The renunciation document was in my lap. I read it the way I read everything at work, slowly, from the bottom up, looking for the detail that doesn't belong. It took me 4 minutes to find it. The notary seal in the bottom right corner belonged to a firm called Aldridge & Voss Notarial Services. I recognized the name because I had looked them up 2 years earlier when my grandmother first told me she was updating her will. She had called me on a Tuesday evening, nervous in the way she only got when she wanted to make sure something was done correctly. She said she wanted to make sure I received the property she had inherited from her own mother, a small parcel of land outside the city that had been in our family for 60 years. She said she had found a notary through her church and the paperwork was already filed. I had looked up Aldridge & Voss that same night, noted their license number, saved it in a folder on my work laptop the way I do with everything, and thought nothing more of it. The seal on the renunciation document had a different license number, same firm name, different number, off by 2 digits. A normal person might have assumed it was a typo. I am not a normal person. I am the person firms hire to find the typo that turns a typo into a felony. I opened my laptop and pulled up the state notary registry. License number on the legitimate Aldridge & Voss seal, 4471B. License number on the document my brother had handed me at our grandmother's graveside, 4117B. 2 digits transposed. The registered holder of 4117B was not a notary at all. It was a landscaping company in a town 3 hours away that had let its business registration lapse in 2019. The seal was fabricated. I sat very still for a moment. Outside, a truck rumbled past on the highway. The motel room smelled like old carpet and the ghost of someone else's takeout. I thought about my grandmother, her handwriting on birthday cards, the way she kept every letter I ever sent her in a shoebox under her bed, how she had called me her careful one. Because I never rushed into anything, I thought about the fact that someone had forged a notary seal on a legal document and handed it to me at her funeral, while her body was still being lowered into the ground. Then I stopped feeling sad and started feeling precise. I needed to understand the full picture before I made a single move. That's the first rule of litigation. Never fire until you know exactly what you're firing at. I called my grandmother's attorney, an older man named Gerald, who had handled her affairs for 20 years and whom I had spoken to briefly at the reception before my brother appeared with his paperwork. It was nearly 9 at night. He answered on the 3rd ring. I apologized for the hour. He said don't worry about it. He had been expecting to hear from me. That alone told me something. I asked him directly, had my grandmother's will been amended in the past 18 months? A long pause. He said yes. 11 months ago, she had come into his office with a set of amendment documents already prepared, asking him to file them as modifications to her existing estate plan. He said she seemed uncertain. He said he had asked her twice if she was sure, and she had said yes both times, but had not looked at him when she said it. He had filed the amendments because she was his client and she was competent, and it was not his place to override her instructions. But he said he had kept a copy of the original will, the one she had filed with him 4 years earlier before the amendments, because something had felt wrong, and he was an old man who trusted his instincts. I asked him what the original will said. He told me that in the original, I was named as the sole beneficiary of the family land parcel, a brokerage account, and a specific piece of jewelry that had belonged to my great-grandmother. He told me the amendments removed my name entirely from all three and transferred everything to my brother. He told me the amendment paperwork had arrived pre-notarized, which he had noted as unusual, but not technically irregular. I asked him to check the notary seal on the amendment documents and read me the license number. Another pause. I heard him moving papers. He read me the number, 4417B. Same fabricated seal. Same landscaping company in a town 3 hours away. The amendments to my grandmother's will had been filed using the same fraudulent notary stamp as the renunciation document my brother had tried to get me to sign at the cemetery. These were not two separate events. They were the same operation, beginning to end. I thanked Gerald. I asked him not to contact my father or my brother until he heard from me again. He said he understood. He said he was sorry. I said I know. I hung up. I needed to think about motive, because motive tells you everything about scope. My grandmother's estate wasn't enormous by any standard, but it wasn't nothing either. The land parcel alone was worth somewhere between $400,000 and $600,000, depending on the current market. The brokerage account had been sitting untouched for years. She'd mentioned once that she never looked at it because numbers made her nervous, and that it had been growing on its own. I didn't know the balance. I needed to know the balance. I still had access to the family shared document drive from 3 years ago, before things deteriorated to the point of no return. My grandmother had added me herself when she was learning how to use the computer and wanted me to help her organize her files. My father had added his own folders there over time. Documents he assumed were safe because they were in a shared drive that he controlled and that he believed I had forgotten about. He was wrong. I never forget about access I've been granted. I navigated to the folder labeled Estate Planning Admin. Inside were several subfolders. One was labeled Grammy Trust Updates. I opened it. What I found in the next 20 minutes changed the shape of everything. There were 6 documents in the folder. The first 3 were what you'd expect: original estate planning paperwork, beneficiary forms, property deeds. The 4th was a bank statement from the brokerage account dated 8 months ago. The balance was $412,000. That alone was more than I had guessed. The 5th document was a transfer authorization form, signed by my grandmother, directing the brokerage to move the full account balance to a joint account held in my father's and brother's names. The transfer was dated 6 weeks ago, 11 days before my grandmother died. The signature on the form was my grandmother's name, but the handwriting was wrong. I have looked at my grandmother's handwriting my entire life. She formed her capital G with a looping flourish that was completely distinctive, a habit she developed as a schoolgirl in the 1950s. The G on this document was printed. Clean, upright, no flourish. My grandmother did not print. She never printed. The 6th document was a note that my father had written to himself. A personal memo that had no business being in a shared folder, the kind of careless mistake that narcissists make because they genuinely believe no one is paying attention. The note referenced a wire transfer scheduled for the following Monday to an account described only by a routing number that I didn't recognize. It included a single line that functioned as his entire moral framework. By the time anyone checks, it's done. By the time anyone checks, it's done. He had written out about money that legally belonged to me, money my grandmother had specifically set aside for me 4 years before she died. He had forged her signature, fabricated a notary seal, amended her will without her genuine consent, transferred her brokerage account under false authorization, and then handed me a document at her funeral to make me voluntarily surrender whatever might remain. And he had scheduled a wire transfer for Monday because he had done the math and decided that the weekend following his mother-in-law's burial was the optimal window to move the money before anyone could stop him. It was Friday night. I had less than 60 hours. The thing about being a litigator is that you know exactly which phone call opens which door. I didn't need to call the local police. Local police would have handed me a civil dispute form and told me to hire an attorney, which, as it happened, I already was one. I didn't need to call my father and give him the chance to delete what was in that shared folder. I didn't need to call my mother, who had been standing 6 feet away when my brother shoved that renunciation document into my hands and had studied the middle distance with the focus of a woman memorizing the exact grain of the grass. I needed one call. I needed Diane. Diane was a former colleague who had left private practice 4 years ago to join the financial crimes unit of the FBI field office in our region. We had kept in touch the way people from law school keep in touch, occasionally, meaningfully, with the mutual understanding that if either of us ever needed the other professionally, we would answer. I had helped her with a document analysis question 18 months ago, off the record, no charge. She had said she owed me one. I had said I hoped I never needed to collect. It was 10:47 on a Friday night when I called her. She picked up on the second ring. I heard the television in the background click off. I need to collect, I said. She didn't ask for context. She said, talk. I talked for 11 minutes. I laid out everything in the order it mattered. The fabricated notary seal, the forged will amendment, the unauthorized brokerage transfer, the forged signature, the personal memo, the scheduled wire transfer for Monday morning. I told her I had documentary evidence for all of it, digitally preserved, time-stamped. I told her about the routing number in my father's memo that I couldn't identify. She asked me to read her the routing number. I heard typing, a pause. Then she said, quietly, "That's an international wire routing prefix. That money is going offshore." I had suspected it. Hearing it confirmed still landed like something cold dropped into my chest. She told me that what I had described constituted wire fraud, forgery of legal instruments, and financial elder abuse under federal statute, the last charge carrying specific weight because my grandmother had been 79 years old and the transfers had been executed in the months immediately preceding her death. She said the Monday wire was the critical constraint. She said she needed everything I had sent to her encrypted email within the hour. She said, "Don't call your father. Don't call your brother. Don't go to the house." She said, "Let me work." I sent her everything within 40 minutes. I did not sleep that night. I sat at the small desk by the motel window and watched the parking lot go quiet and then less quiet as the hours turned. I thought about my grandmother telling me at 17 that I was going to be someone. I thought about the fact that she had quietly, carefully, tried to make sure I had something solid to stand on, and that the people she had trusted with her final years had been dismantling that foundation behind her back while she was still alive. I thought about what it costs a person to finally see clearly the thing they have been looking at without seeing for a very long time. My mother is not a villain in the cinematic sense. She does not sneer. She does not scheme out loud. She is the kind of woman who brings a casserole to every family gathering and then, in the same breath, tells you quietly that maybe you should have been more supportive of your brother. That maybe if you came home more often, things would be different. That maybe the tension in this family is something you could choose to fix if you really wanted to. She has always made my absence the cause and never the consequence. She watched my brother hand me legal paperwork at our grandmother's grave, and she said nothing. And then at the reception, she pulled me aside and said that she hoped I wasn't going to make this harder than it needed to be. She has always been the soft architecture of every bad thing that was done to me. Not the hand, but the room. The hand moved through freely. I used to make excuses for that. I used to tell myself that she was caught between two things she loved, and that was a painful position. I have stopped telling myself that story. You cannot accidentally provide cover for fraud. You cannot accidentally stand at your mother's grave while your son commits a federal crime and call it neutrality. The quiet parent is not the forgotten victim. The quiet parent is infrastructure. Diane called me at 6:45 Saturday morning. She said her supervisor had reviewed the evidence package and authorized a field operation contingent on one additional element. They needed my father and brother to make an affirmative misrepresentation of the estate's status to a third party in a monitored setting, a controlled situation. She asked me if I thought they could arrange a meeting, perhaps something structured around reviewing the estate, where my father and brother believed they were finalizing their control of the assets. I told her I could arrange it. I called my father at 7:15. He answered with the particular warmth he only uses when he thinks he has already won. loose, unhurried, faintly condescending. He said he was glad I called. He said he knew this was hard, but that he hoped I had thought about what my grandmother would have really wanted, which is a sentence that only works on people who don't have access to their grandmother's original estate documents. I told him I had thought about it. I told him I understood the will as it stood, and I had questions about the estate administration process that I wanted to go through with him in person. I said I thought we should sit down together, him and my brother and me, and I wanted to bring a colleague who specialized in estate transitions to help me understand the paperwork. I said I was not there to fight. I said I just wanted to understand what Grammy had wanted. He paused for just a moment. Then he said that sounded reasonable. He said he was glad I was being mature about it. He said he would let my brother know and we could meet at the family home Sunday afternoon. He said he was proud of me for being adult enough to have this conversation. I said thank you. I hung up. Then I sat very still for a moment and let the ugliness of that exchange settle before I moved on to the next thing. Sunday arrived the way consequential days always do. Ordinary on the surface, unremarkable weather. The kind of light that doesn't signify anything. I drove to the family home in my rental car. Diane had briefed me the evening before on what to expect and what not to do. I had one job: be present, be calm, answer questions directly, and let the situation develop. The house looked the same as it always had. The same flower beds my grandmother had planted years ago, only slightly overgrown now. The same front door. I had grown up spending summers here, sleeping in the back bedroom, learning to bake with my grandmother in a kitchen that always smelled like vanilla and old wood. I had stopped coming back 3 years ago, after an incident I will not detail here except to say that it made very clear that my presence in this house was conditional, and the conditions were not ones I was willing to meet. I knocked. My father opened the door. He was dressed well, the way he always dressed when he wanted to project authority. Collared shirt, dark slacks, the watch he wore to important things. He smiled and said he was glad I came. My brother was in the living room, sprawled in the armchair he had claimed as his since childhood, wearing the specific expression he uses when he wants to appear relaxed, and it isn't working. He nodded at me without getting up. My colleague arrived 2 minutes after I did. I had introduced him to my family as David, a colleague from my firm who specialized in estate transitions. He was wearing a gray suit, which is the color that means nothing to anyone and therefore draws no suspicion. He carried a leather portfolio. He shook my father's hand. He shook my brother's hand. He set the portfolio on the dining room table and opened it with the practiced motion of a man who has done this 1,000 times. He was a federal agent. His name was not David. My father sat at the head of the table as if he had been waiting for this role his entire life. My brother pulled his chair in with an eagerness he couldn't quite conceal. The agent placed several documents on the table, standard-looking estate administration forms, the kind of paperwork that attends any inheritance review. He explained, in measured, professional language, that he needed both of them to verify the current status of the estate assets in writing, as a standard procedural requirement for any estate transition involving real property and brokerage accounts. He explained that the form was an asset verification affidavit. He said it was a legal requirement. He said it simply needed to confirm that all listed assets were legitimately held, legally obtained, and free of any disputed claims or irregularities. He placed a pen on the table. My father looked at the form for exactly 4 seconds. I know because I counted. Then he picked up the pen and signed his name with the broad, easy signature of someone who has never once in his life worried that a document would come back to hurt him. He passed the pen to my brother. My brother signed without reading a single word. The agent collected both forms. He placed them back in the portfolio. He closed the portfolio. He said, "Thank you both for your time," in the same tone he might use to close any routine meeting. Then he opened the portfolio again and removed something that was not a form. He placed his badge on the table. My father stared at it. I watched something go out of his face. Not the color, but the quality underneath the color. The thing that had always made him seem larger than he was. The agent introduced himself by his actual name and his actual title. He explained, without hurry, that both men had just signed a federal affidavit attesting to the legitimate and lawful nature of assets that were, in fact, the product of forged documents, unauthorized financial transfers, and the deliberate financial exportation of an elderly person. He explained that this signature, combined with the documentary evidence already in federal custody, constituted knowing participation in wire fraud and financial elder abuse. He explained that a warrant for the Monday wire transfer had already been issued and the receiving account had been flagged for immediate freeze. He turned to my brother. He said that the renunciation document presented at the cemetery had also been examined and that the fabricated notary seal had been traced. He said there were text messages between my brother and the person who manufactured the seal that had been obtained pursuant to a warrant issued Saturday afternoon. My brother made a sound that I do not have a precise word for. My father said very quietly that this was a misunderstanding. He said he could explain. He said my name. He looked at me across the table and said my name the way people say the name of someone they thought they owned and are just now realizing they never did. I looked back at him for a moment. I thought about my grandmother's handwriting. I thought about that looping G she had been writing her whole life and the clean printed letter on the transfer document that was supposed to be her signature. I thought about a woman in her late 70s being gently, systematically stripped of her choices by the people she trusted most in the last years of her life while I was 4 states away, not knowing any of it was happening. I said, "You didn't just steal from me, you stole from her," while she was alive. And she died not knowing whether what she wanted for me was going to happen. That's what I can't forgive. Then I stood up, smoothed my jacket, and walked to the front door. Behind me, I heard the second agent, the one who had been waiting in the hallway, begin to speak in the official language that those moments require. I heard my brother's voice crack. I heard my father say something that was not an apology and not a denial, but something in between, the language of a man recalculating in real time and finding no good options. I stepped outside. The same flower beds, the same front door behind me now. The late afternoon light was doing something ordinary and beautiful across the neighbor's yard. My mother had been in the kitchen during the meeting. She had not been invited to sit at the table and had not asked to be. When I passed the kitchen doorway on my way out, I saw her standing at the counter with her hands wrapped around a coffee mug, watching me with an expression I had spent my entire childhood trying to decode. I had always wanted that expression to mean something complex, caught between love and loyalty, pained by impossible choices. I know now that it meant something simpler. It meant that she had made her calculations and I was not on the winning side of them and she was sorry it had come to this, but not sorry enough to have done anything differently. I did not stop. I did not speak to her. I had nothing to say that would change anything and no interest in providing the conversation she could later describe as the moment she tried to reach out. I sat in my rental car in the driveway for about 3 minutes. I could hear movement inside the house. I didn't need to know the details of what came next. I had done the part that was mine to do. The charges were filed the following week. Wire fraud, forgery of legal instruments, financial elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud. The Monday wire transfer was blocked at 7 a.m. and the funds returned to the estate account pending legal review. Gerald, the estate attorney, provided the original will to the probate court along with a notarized statement of his concerns from the day the amendments had been filed. The fabricated notary seal was linked to a document preparation service my brother had found online, the kind of service that exists in a legal gray area and folds completely under federal scrutiny. My father had hired a lawyer who was good at what he did. It didn't matter. The affidavit they had both signed on Sunday was precisely what made the difference. A written, voluntary, witnessed confirmation that they knew what they were certifying and certified it anyway. Wire fraud alone was significant. The elder abuse charge carried additional weight. There was a particular seriousness in federal court to the exploitation of someone who is elderly and who is now dead and cannot speak for herself. My brother, who had always believed that charm was a kind of immunity, discovered that it does not translate into federal proceedings. My mother was not charged. I want to be honest about that because leaving it out would be a form of dishonesty I'm not comfortable with. She had not signed the documents. She had not fabricated the seal. She could credibly claim she had not known the specifics. The law has a threshold for complicity, and she had stayed just behind it, the way she had stayed behind things her entire life, present enough to benefit, careful enough to survive. She is living in the house, which will likely be subject to civil proceedings once the estate matter resolves. I don't know what her life looks like now, and I have spent some time making peace with the fact that I don't need to know. The estate is in probate. Gerald expects the original will to be reinstated in full once the court reviews the evidence of fraud. The land parcel, the brokerage account, the jewelry that belonged to my great-grandmother, all of it is pending. I am not counting on any of it until the paperwork is final, because I am a litigator and I know that paperwork is only final when it's final. But that is not actually the part I keep coming back to. What I keep coming back to is a phone call I found in my grandmother's records while Gerald and I were reviewing her documents. A call she made to my cell phone 14 months ago at 2:30 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. I have no memory of receiving it. I checked and found that I had been in depositions that entire afternoon with my phone off. She had not left a voicemail. She had just called and I hadn't answered, and she had not called back. I don't know what she was going to say. I've thought about it more than I should, probably. I have a theory that is not a theory so much as a feeling, that she knew something was wrong, that she was frightened in the quiet way of someone who doesn't want to believe what they are beginning to see, and that she reached out to the careful one, because the careful one would know what to do. I wasn't there. I think about what it means to come through for someone after the fact, whether that counts for anything in the moral accounting of things. I've gone back and forth on it. I think it counts. I think it is not nothing to make sure that what someone wanted is honored even when they are no longer here to demand it. I think the most concrete thing I can do for my grandmother now is make sure that her actual wishes are the ones that stand, not the forged version, not the amended version, not the amended version, not the version my father and brother constructed while she was too old and too tired to fight them. I have asked Gerald to add a dedication line to whatever documentation closes this estate. I want the record to reflect that the original will, her actual, chosen, considered will, was the one that prevailed. Not as a footnote, as the document. She was the woman who told me at 17 that I was going to be someone. The least I can do is make sure her words are the ones that hold. If you have ever shown up for someone too late and spent years figuring out whether it was enough, drop the word enough in the comments. I read every single one. And if you know someone whose family is slowly, quietly rewriting the story around them while they aren't looking, share this. Sometimes the most important thing a person can hear is that the careful one can still win.